Well, I'm going to welcome everybody to this really, really terrific call. So pleased to have Paul Klein with us talking about social impact. It's a really, really important topic. I think probably never more important than it is right now in the world. On behalf of Susie Ellis, I want to say hello and good morning. Susie usually kicks off these calls. She's getting ready to travel, so I don't think she's going to be able to be on, but she will certainly be listening to this later. So we thank you so much, and I'm going to give you a few instructions, Zoom instructions, and then we're going to get right to it so we can spend as much time as possible with Paul. So Beatrice, you can stop sharing. Thank you. Okay, you're all muted. Beatrice does that because we've got a big group and it's necessary to eliminate any of the background noise. There are two ways to view this call, and the top right of your Zoom window gives you that option. One is a gallery view, which shows you all of these wonderful faces, and you can scroll page to page with that blue arrow, or speaker view, which I urge you to choose when Paul is talking, because it makes him much more prominent on your screen. If you have a question for Paul, I'd like you to post it in the chat. Bottom center of your Zoom window, there's a chat icon. Most of you are very familiar with it by now. It's already open. That's where you would post a question, and I will do my best to aggregate those, grab those, and pull them into the conversation. You should also know that we send the chat to the person whose masterclass this is. If questions don't get answered, Paul will answer them later, and you'll all get those answers. So not to worry if your question doesn't get answered, it will ultimately be answered. Alas, right next to the chat screen, Zoom has put a bright green share screen button. Please don't click that. That becomes very distracting if all of a sudden people share their screen. The call is being recorded, and we share that recording on our website almost immediately and urge you to share it with people in your network, because it's a really, they're very well viewed after the call. People like to listen to these. So, and I'm just going to, because I know that Sally Frankel, who's on this call, has to leave the call a little bit early. And so I met Paul Klein through Sally Frankel, who along with Wendy Bosilovich leads the Global Wellness Institute initiative on social impact. So Sally, I'd like you to just say something about Paul. Let us know how you guys became connected, and then we will get right into it. You have to unmute bottom left.
Oh, sorry. I thought you had to unmute me. I thought you had the power. Anyway, thank you so much, Nancy. And hi, everyone from all over the world. This is very exciting. Actually, the credit for Paul Klein's involvement and being here today really belongs to Wendy Bosilovich. Wendy, who is my co-chair for the Social Impact Initiative, met Paul through her business dealings. Her company is Canadian owned. And Paul was, in fact, doing business with her company, First Service Residential. That's the large corporate entity. And we were incredibly lucky because Paul is an expert in crafting corporate social responsibility programs, how social impact can be done well. I've learned a tremendous amount from Paul because I always thought that, you know, just the intention was enough, just wanting to have the social impact, but actually it's far more complex than that, in that, you know, like all things, we need to really apply true consciousness to what we do and what its intended consequences are. So the one thing I will just say is that we as the Social Impact Initiative would welcome anybody who would like to join our initiative, and quite frankly, we could use more global participants. So that is my little pitch. So if you have any interest in joining our initiative and helping spread this work a little bit further throughout the wellness industry, please feel free to reach out to me or Beatrice or Nancy or Paul. And that's it from me. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Sally. And I will say that the initiative that Sally and Wendy run is really quite terrific. They do really wonderful work. They have their own website, a lot of stuff going on. So we'll send you all of those links in the follow-up email that we send after these calls. Okay, so now it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Klein, and I will do it a little bit more formally because I don't know him as well personally, although I'm getting to know him. But Paul's an internationally recognized authority on the intersection of business and social change. And he believes companies need to do more to help their employees and communities, even if it means doing it with less. He has 7 principles for creating positive social change that can build reputation, drive sales, encourage engagement. And I know we're all very interested to hear what those are. He's the CEO and founder of Impakt, with a K, a certified B Corp that balances purpose and profit. He's the founder of the Impakt Foundation for Social Change, and that's a nonprofit doing incredible work to find employment for people in need. He writes and speaks and does all kinds of things, sits on boards, and he's lately been very busy with a podcast called Change for Good. He's interviewed rock stars, government officials, bankers, corporate and foundation CEOs, and others. And he's learned a lot, and he's going to share those learnings with us. Paul, welcome. You have to unmute yourself, bottom left. Thank you.
Thank you. It's what a pleasure to be here with you, Nancy, and my great friends, Sally and Wendy, of course, and right back at you because, you know, it's a pleasure to be collaborating with both of you and our whole social impact initiative. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and in a shameless plug for the great work that our whole team is doing.
Absolutely. Well, I feel there's no shame in plugging social good.
No,
right?
Totally.
Paul, I wonder if we could just start for a minute with you defining social impact. I think that it's a term that's maybe loosely used to describe a lot of different things, but maybe you could kind of help us refine that definition a little so we can understand after that, you know, everything that you're going to be talking about.
Well, I think about it really is through a lens of social change and social impact. So, you know, one of the things that sadly is in the, and probably there's no better time to talk about this now, is, you know, probably most of us here on this call are in, you know, relatively speaking, extremely privileged positions, and yet, you know, the vast majority of people in the world do not have the privilege that we do. And so, you know, we are always thinking about social impact in terms of social change and how to best move the needle on some of these issues that have been chronically a problem for so long, which the UN has documented very well in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's basically it's improving the social and environmental conditions of people in a way that is meaningful and measurable.
Okay, and tell us about this podcast series. Why did you start this, and what's the value of that?
Well, yeah, our whole world is, as you said before, Nancy, the intersection of business and social change. And I guess in March, as it became clear to me that, and our whole team at Impakt, that the conditions for many people were getting worse than they ever were. You know, so that those people who were vulnerable before were even more vulnerable. And not only that, I think that the organizations that exist to help those people were also vulnerable. So you've got, I don't know, here in Canada, Bruce McDonald from Imagine Canada told me at one point that I think 20% of charitable organizations were or in danger of being bankrupt. You know, so what happens to the people who depend on those organizations for services? And not just that, but it's, you know, social change happens in lots of places by lots of different organizations. And the restaurants, small businesses, frontline operations, and so on that employ people who are no longer able to employ those people are again in a situation where they were not vulnerable and all of a sudden they are vulnerable, but the organizations that exist to support them are not able to do so. So social change is not easy at the best of times. And I felt that part of what we could bring to this is just really a glimpse into what experts are doing around the world, and wanted to, with no real agenda other than just to have a conversation with people who are doing incredible work, and to share that and create a sense of also ideas and also inspiration for people at a time when they really need it. So we spoke to, we had the good fortune of knowing a lot of people around the world. And so we spoke to people, and someone here is from Singapore. We spoke to someone in Singapore and India, in a number of different countries in Europe, of course, in the US and Canada as well. And I think collectively, I don't know, I feel like I was so fortunate to be able to speak to these people, honestly. It was just, we did this every week for 16 or 17 weeks. And we shared it. I learned so much, and was able just to be happy that other people might be able to get a couple of ideas from each one of these conversations to help them in their own social change world.
It sounds unbelievable. So COVID hit, and you decided to have these conversations and to really sort of help people figure out how to make change. Can you share with us some of the specific learnings from the people that you spoke with?
Well, yeah, there's the really, I guess around 7 things or so that really stood out for me and made me think differently. And I also wrote this up in an article that's in the London School of Economics Business Review. People could read.
We will share that link. Just everybody should know. We'll share that link in any of the other links and documents and information that come up, that arise on this call.
Yeah. So the things that really, and I reflect back on what I heard from these amazing people, and the things that I felt were most important to share, and are, I guess, first of all, the main thing was people talking about employees, about their own employees, and so it's come a long way from, in the corporate responsibility world, where you have this sort of ubiquitous mission of getting, having volunteer days for your employees and helping them match donations and all this stuff, which actually, honestly, is, a lot of people including me, would say not that effective anyway. But now it's a whole different level, where the employees are themselves, even people who have stable jobs, are vulnerable in lots of different ways. So what does that mean? People are, at home working and caregiving at the same time, work-life balance, which generally is pretty much out of balance. I think most of us would agree, is even more out of balance, because the blurriness between, work and home life is, it's just not there. And people's health is suffering. They can't get physical exercise, and people don't have daycare support because the daycares are closed. So a lot of the conversation, really, the learning is about, okay, if you're a company, like, what are you going to do for your employees who are in this situation? And I think also, and this is, I think, particularly relevant to this audience, is wellness, honestly, because, again, like the degree of mental health issues, depression and anxiety and insomnia, all those things. And, so felt like if there was ever a time for the kind of work that everyone here does, it would be now. And those large corporations that are still stuck in a kind of an old space of, well, we're going to give people a day off to go and paint a fence somewhere, that's not on, but the work that you all do is. The other thing that I think was really came through loud and clear is obviously strategy is important. We want to think about strategically for a business what the right thing to do is, but there's also urgent need. Like, people need help now.
Right.
And so how do you take the filter off, make it so that you can get as much funding as possible to the people who are at the front lines who need support now. So, and a lot of organizations, as we all know, build up a lot of bureaucracy and process around giving. Well, that doesn't work. It's not where it's at today. There's a woman from TD, Andrea Barrick, who leads their CSR programs around the world. told us about an initiative. I think it's called the Community Resilience Initiative, where they, in a very short period of time, were able to mobilize millions of dollars to get out fast to frontline organizations. And there's a
That's
group
TD Bank.
TD Bank, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was fantastic. And I know groups of foundations have gotten together to increase the assets, from 2% to 5% every year. So like, these are things from organizations that are typically very slow moving fast to get money at the door. I thought that was really important. The other
Paul,
thing,
just a quick question. Do you help when you do your work? I mean, you were collecting this information. We want to hear about all the other things that you learned.
Yep.
Do you then help companies craft their strategies for social impact based on, the sort of the needs of the day and the resources of the organization and the desires of the organization? I mean, do you work with them on strategy? Is that what you do?
Well, we work with them on strategy and also on implementing that strategy.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. That's good. I mean, it's just good to know. Shameless plug for Paul, but that's good to know because, I think it's really important that there are not that many people, I think, that do exactly what you do. So anyway, go back to telling us more of what you learned and what people are doing, because it's inspiring to hear that.
Well,
I'm so glad I use TD Bank.
yeah, they're amazing. They're great, and Andrea is amazing. The other thing, actually, it's a good segue, Nancy, because the strategy is also changing. Because the way large organizations used to approach work in this area is really in the form of kind of resources in, dollars in. We give $10 million to homelessness, we give $50 million to health or whatever. And really, and this is already, like a lot of things in COVID, this has already started to shift, but the shift is even more acute and important now, which is what we're interested in doing. And I think what everyone's audiences are interested in doing is not how much money, but what happens with the money, so tell me that you're focused on as I said before, on solving a social problem and what you're going to do to make that happen. The resources are important, but how are we actually going to know this is going to happen, and how is it going to be authentically done? So I think so people talked a lot about that. And I think that there's, in business, KPIs are important, obviously, to help all of us track the performance of businesses. But in this space, I would say that the social KPIs are more important than ever. And if you achieve social KPIs, that will actually help your business KPIs. And I will say, actually, another plug for Social Impact Initiative, that people can go, and I believe Sally can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's globalsocialimpactinitiative.org.
We'll post all that later. Don't anybody try to write that down.
And there we've got a manifesto that is really about social impact and exactly what I'm talking about. So you can check that out. And there are also great tools and resources there.
So give us an example of a social impact KPI, the impact on business. Sheila McCann is asking that. She's in Surrey, and I think it's something that we all would like to know. I'm going to interrupt. So many people have great questions. We're going to really make this conversational. So tell us about a KPI for social impact.
Well, the most basic thing, and it all starts with actually having a program that is dedicated to and focused on the outcome rather than the input. So if you're, I don't know, like Home Depot, we've done a lot of work with here in Canada, focused on ending youth homelessness. So that's, it's such a clear thing. And so everything that they do will be assessed in this area, assessed on the degree to which it's contributing to that KPI. And there's a lot of sub things beyond that, but it's that kind of clarity. So the KPI is not like it used to be, like, well, did we give away the money? And to who? Check. No, it's not that. And beyond that, the important things that people are really starting to think about are what are the implications of achieving that KPI? So to use that example again, if you are successful in helping to move the needle on ending youth homelessness, what you're also doing is ensuring better health for people, ensuring lower use of the criminal justice system, ensuring less family violence, and ensuring better education outcomes. So and better health and wellness outcomes as well. So there's all kinds of things that fall from that. But you've got to start with, organizations have to start with actually committing to moving the needle on a specific thing. And there's your sort of highest level KPI. But I believe that organizations that do that, if you actually can harness your resources as a business to make a difference, maybe not solving everything, but moving the needle a little bit in your own way as is possible in your own context, that's what's going to drive people thinking differently about your business. That's what's going to improve your reputation. That's going to contribute to sales. That's going to contribute to more employee engagement. So, and also to investor relations too, and government relations.
And so do you see, Deborah Enzenbacher asks, just sort of, and it's a good question. I think it's the new sort of question that overlays every question, which is how are the KPIs for social impact changing during the pandemic? I mean, what do you see as you've been doing this for a long time, so pre-pandemic, and then, now during the pandemic, are those KPIs, is that changing?
That's a great question. I think it's a little bit related to what I was saying before. I think there's two things. One is partly the KPI is how fast can we do this, or it should be a KPI. How fast can we take action? And obviously you want to get funds to organizations that are effective as quickly as possible. So I think that's really important. And as I said, the employee piece is also really important. But I think the other thing, which is yet to be achieved because we're still in this, is related to what I just was talking about, which is the degree to which businesses can solve social problems or contribute to solving social problems. Well, I think that right now it's a little early. I mean, some people are already doing that, and so that's great. But I think that's one of the things that will come out of this, because you know what, people are looking for businesses to make an impact in a way that is beyond just some kind of advertising campaign.
Yeah,
exactly.
Paul, in addition to corporate leaders and rock stars, when you did your podcast, you also spoke to people in government. Yes. And one of the questions that Ranga asks is, from your conversations, do you see the government role dwindling given their preoccupation with COVID and the economy? And do you see the private sector stepping up?
Well, I think it's both, actually. And again, I can't speak to what's happening in all the countries who are represented here. But in many cases, the government, I would say, is actually doing more. At least they are here. So the government is contributing to people's economic.
Can you just be which government?
In Canada.
There you go.
Well, I guess in the US, I hate to say it, but the news from yesterday was not so good.
Yeah, we're a very global. We're a very global group, and so when government doesn't have one face in this group, and certainly my government would not fit that bill. So so you're talking about the Canadian government, okay?
Yeah, and I think if there's ever a time when governments ought to step back in and do more, it's right now. That doesn't mean that businesses shouldn't be a part of that. And I think it's another great segue into one of the things that people told me in those conversations, which is that corporations, businesses have to actually be partnering more with governments than they have been, which has not been done very well. In fact, it's just news from today here in Canada, which I thought was really interesting. It's going to be announced, maybe it's already announced, it's going to be announced, that Canada is going to declare plastic to be a toxic substance today.
Whoa.
And for people in the business of consumer packaged goods and so on, and that's a really big deal. So what are you going to do about that? And so people have to lean into that, and there's some good examples. I could think of a couple of years ago, and so how are businesses going to collaborate with government and collaborate with each other, even their competitors? That's a really important thing. Starbucks is a great example of that, who a few years ago convened what I believe was called the Cup Summit. And the Cup Summit was bringing together people, including their competitors, to really think about how they could improve the recyclability or reuse of their cups. So again, it's a great model, and so people should be doing more of that. The other thing, just thinking about some of the other things I heard, is I think we've been talking about people like Starbucks, but the thing I think that's also so important, and it may relate to a lot of people here too, is the role of small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs. So I think that, and the people I spoke to were very clear that, we all tend to think of the Starbucks of these world, or the Dove or whoever, these big organizations who are doing these great big programs. But we do know that the vast majority of the GDP of all the countries here, I'm sure, is actually driven by small and medium-sized businesses. And the vast number of people employed is in small and medium-sized businesses. And so the contribution of the people here today, I'm sure, to socioeconomic wellness and change in the countries that you're in is vast, but it is not generally recognized, and that's not good enough. So that has to change. Big businesses also have to be recognizing that, because probably a lot of the people here have customers that are big businesses. And so that relationship is really important, and it's not good enough. And not enough of those businesses are recognizing the situation that their own suppliers are in. So, I think there ought to be better payment terms, or some companies are, deferring various charges. People are in certain cases giving loans to their own suppliers, making a commitment to this. Yeah, and I think it's also just a time when, when the beauty and genius and innovation of smaller businesses should get more credit. I spoke to one amazing person. Her name is Jen Harper, and she's the CEO of a company called Cheekbone Beauty, which people should check out. I think it's cheekbonebeauty.ca. And they are an Indigenous-owned beauty brand. Mm. And she started this here in Canada. You could probably buy them anywhere. They make one of their products is called, I think it's called Warrior Women Lipstick, something like that. Anyway, you got to check it out. Check out cheekbonebeauty.ca. It's a fantastic example of a small business that's doing exceptionally well, and just demonstrates the power of business and small business. It's just on all fronts. I absolutely love it.
There's long been a feeling, and it was used to in this country. It was driven by sort of millennials, that the companies they were going to support were the companies that were doing good in the world. So that the impact they were having, you could choose any number of brands for any given product. But so, if I'm going to buy socks, I'm going to buy Bombas because they're going to give a pair for every pair I buy, things like that. Are you finding that that is still a stronghold in the world of business? People want that?
I think it can be, I think it's how well it's done, I think that people are looking more closely at these things. So it's not like, it's just sort of accepting that. It's like saying, okay, well, what is actually really happening here? And Tom Shoes was an early example of that. I love the work they do, but they also, had gotten into a bit of controversy around what they were doing, because people found that there wasn't what was happening in terms of how the shoes were being donated, who they were given to, and so on, wasn't being done in a really thoughtful way. It was being done in what I would say is a very transactional way. So it's one thing to say you buy their shoes, they get the shoes, and we've given millions of shoes out, and that's all good to a point. Mm-hmm. But I think now, and I would credit millennials for looking more closely at this stuff, and say, okay, well, what is actually happening here? How do we really know that change is happening? And so Tom's, again, I don't, check it out. I can't remember exactly all the things that they've done, but they actually re-looked at what they were doing and really improved it, and really got people on the ground that helped understand and measure the impact of what they were doing in these communities. So I'd really give them a lot of credit for it. But it came because they actually had pushback from people who really care about this.
Yeah.
And I think
sorry. No, go ahead. Um, there are a whole bunch of questions around the issue of wellness and corporate social responsibility, CSR, and how, if you're seeing any integration of those things, of people's well-being being part of that. Not every company is big enough to have an officer in charge of that. What are you seeing any integration? Are you hearing people talking about those kinds of things? Obviously of great interest to this audience, but well beyond too.
I don't think enough, honestly.
Okay.
I think it should be more. I think people within this industry are, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know people in the wellness industry a lot. And so I know that, but I don't, before I got involved with Wendy and Sally and the Social Impact Initiative group, I wasn't so aware of this,
Mm-hmm.
And so, people, especially larger companies, of course, you're supporting healthcare, more traditional medicine, all that stuff, which is important too. But the number of companies that I see still who, I'm talking bigger companies, who actually have made wellness a priority is few and far between. But as I said, I think that there's the opportunity. Like, I always look at the positive, and I think there's the opportunity, and
right.
the opportunity for people here. Now, there's a couple of things I could think of just from the frame of reference here in Canada. There's one of the biggest, probably the biggest telephone company here is Bell.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a whole, it's called Bell Let's Talk. And that is about mental wellness, mental health.
Okay.
And so that's one aspect of it. But I think that, I think the paradox of wellness is, and what people don't know, is that wellness can be done in a way, invested in and practiced in a way that's probably a lot less expensive than a lot of other investments that people might make, and have more impact. And so that's why I think there's a big opportunity now.
Yeah, I'm going to pose a question that Danielle Posa put in the chat, and it kind of dovetails a question that Sally has. So Danielle, I know, works with Deepak Chopra, and her question is, how do you deal with the potential contradiction of focusing on external impact when there isn't enough impact internally happening with employees? And how do you advise companies on how to improve employee well-being? And then Sally's is to share top 3 best practices for social impact programs. They're a little bit connected.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we always would look at starting internally first.
Okay.
Because it just adds, there's so much credibility, there's so much risk actually in not doing that. And I can think of a few examples of companies that have come out, and actually Bell is one of them in the early days of this program, as an example. Not to, there's two sides of everything sometimes, but a lot of when Bell first announced this mental health initiative, it was actually revealed by some people that perhaps the mental wellness of its own employees had not been the biggest priority. So again, I don't know the whole story of this. I think they're doing a great job now, but it's just a really good example of why it's important to focus internally first, because you know what, if you don't, it's going to get out. People, are going to be sharing this stuff. And it also adds so much credibility, to an organization's ability to kind of talk and walk the talk, I would say, and because people in companies, they're not just employees, they're people who have the same issues as many people do. So I think it's really important to start internally. The other thing, which I think is not exactly related to the question, but I just think it's an important thing, something that I really believe in, which we practice all the time now, and which is not done hardly at all, is companies who are, I'm sure we've all been in a situation, you're in a corporate boardroom and they're talking about, well, what should we do? Who should we give money to? Who should we support? How should we know it's effective? And they're talking about things that they have absolutely no idea about, like hunger, like, lack of education. You have privileged people sitting in boardrooms trying to figure out what to do. And so we don't believe that's right. And so the whole principle of, nothing about us without us is so important, right? And so if corporations really want to be effective at moving the needle on some social change issues, they actually have to involve people right from the beginning and right through who have experienced the issues that they're trying to address. Never happens.
Is that what you advise people to do?
I absolutely do. And,
yeah.
but it's, people don't know how to do that. And it actually honestly doesn't even happen enough in the nonprofit world,
Yeah.
which could be a fairly privileged place as well. Like sometimes the nonprofit world is not the most diverse situation either.
So to Sally's question about the top 3 best practices for social impact programs, is that something you can encapsulate that way?
That's a hard question to answer because there's so many. It depends on the situation, depends on the circumstance. Like, I don't know, what comes to mind for me, like, so when I think about if we're looking at these kinds of things through a lens of social change and social outcomes, what then, so working backwards from that, what are the drivers to that? Well, I would say, coming back to what I just said, again, which never happens and should, which is like if you are not involving people, tapping into people with lived experience and getting their understanding of what the problem really is and what should be done about it, you are not going to have a really effective program. It's still going to be very, what I would call social change light, And it's usually, unfortunately, that's mostly what it is. I would say the employee involving and engaging the employees and giving a voice to employees is also fundamentally important. And also, I guess I would say the other part of it is who you're working with to make that change. Like what partner organizations, or perhaps it's the government, perhaps it's other companies, whoever it may be. And again, really doing that in a thoughtful way that engages their effectiveness and credibility.
Paul, Erica Marchese asks, and it's something I think of interest to all of us, and that is, you've mentioned a couple of sort of US and Canada-based companies, but when you look at the world of social responsibility, what companies around the world do you think are doing it right or doing it well?
Well,
are there a few that stand out?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things that I've been really impressed with, actually someone I spoke with as well is, now of course I've forgotten the company, but there's a lot of amazing things happening in Germany with some of the German corporate foundations I've been very impressed with. So I would single those out. These companies like BMW and some of the car companies there have done amazing things in terms of the sustainability of increasing the sustainability of their vehicles and so on, which they don't actually talk about too much, which I've been really impressed with. Which is another thing that just a handy tip, I think, in terms of authenticity, is that often when companies talk about, we have to be seen as authentic. Well, one of the best ways to be seen as authentic is when companies do things that do not appear to be in their own self-interest. It's
right.
a very good way to actually get credibility. It's just something I keep in mind a lot. Actually, I think I don't remember. I think it was Wendy or Sally who introduced me to the Binod Chaudhary.
Yes.
And his work, he is, I believe, the only billionaire in Nepal. And
he spoke at our summit last year in Singapore.
Yeah, so what they are doing with, I believe it's the CF, I think is the company. And they operate incredible, in addition to him they have their own foundation, but they have these incredible properties. One is called, in the Philippines, called The Farm, I believe.
Yep.
Which is an incredible, like I'd love to go there, top to bottom, sustainability wellness initiative, which I think they're expanding around the world. This is actually not a company that's a global company, but I really think they're doing great work, which is the Four Seasons Hotel. which is coming back to COVID. One of the things that they have done, which I thought was a super great idea, is they've actually repurposed, because the hotels are obviously, a lot of them are empty or not as full as they should be, using those hotels to provide rooms for frontline healthcare workers. And I know that's happening in New York for sure, and probably in other places as well.
Yeah, that's been a big initiative, and a lot of properties doing that around the world, which is a really wonderful thing. The farm is also, they were also part of our summit last year, and they're an incredible place. There are a lot of wellness destinations that have, you know, sustainability at their core. There are some that are B Corp. You know, can you tell us a little bit about what a B Corp is, and why isn't every company a B Corp?
Well, more and more are. B Corps are corporations that are kind of certified to as companies that are making a social and environmental impact and making money at the same time. And so I think there are 2,500 or 3,000 around the world. We're very proud to be a B Corp. And it does color how you do what you do and how people see you, I think. Sets a higher bar. And it's not the only bar, because there are other people that do things like this. But you know, you've got companies increasingly, larger organizations like Danone Yogurt would be one of the largest B Corps in the world. And here in Canada, one of the big financial institutions, BDC, is a B Corp. And then there's our colleague Brian's company. Remind me of that, Sally.
Comfort Zone. Comfort Zone. And, yep. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And they do incredible work. And
yeah.
Brian, who's part of our social impact initiative, is an amazing person, and the company that what they are doing is as good as I have seen anywhere, for sure. And so, yeah, I think more and more people are doing that. And I think that, you know, but when it gets to the point of saying, okay, well, like, I think that people should be asking the question. It sounds crazy now, but like, what would it take for an oil and gas company to be a B Corp?
Right.
Is that possible? What would that look like? You know, how is that going to work? But you know what, it is going to work, because eventually these people are going to be sustainable energy companies, and they could be B Corps. So I think that's a really good kind of lens for companies to start looking at themselves, you know, and aspiring to.
Paul, when you did your interviews, was there anything that really surprised you about what people told you?
I don't know. I guess the main thing was, I think I went into it thinking, yeah, as I said, I'm very much of an optimist, but it seemed like not a very optimistic time, you know? And so I think that one of the biggest surprises was how optimistic everybody else was, you know, and how much opportunity people saw in the context of something that was very dark. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, I say mother's, what is it? Mother's the, whatever is the mother of invention.
Yes.
And what's the expression? Train, whatever it is.
Necessity.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Thank you, Sally. Anyway, but it's really true. And so sometimes it takes some stuff to happen that's bad before people say, okay, we could do something about this. Look at Black Lives Matter. You know, like, again, another thing that I think is, we talked about in these sessions, and I've certainly thought a lot about it. We haven't done a good enough job, for sure, even in our own world. But Black lives, of course, do matter. Indigenous lives do matter, and people of color's lives matter. And that's all, you know, of course, just what it should be, but it's far from what it needs to be. So I think that's the other theme, which is really important for everyone, which is, it is even going beyond what I was saying and what we were talking about before, which is activism, basically corporate activism. And I think that's really something that is so fundamental now. And you've got companies that are starting to do that. You know, like people like Ben and Jerry's, actually, if you look at what they've been doing, of course, they've always been leaders right from the very beginning, and they still are. And but there's not enough of that, you know. And so the kind of getting to the systemic reasons why things are the way they are just needs to happen. And that also ties in a little bit to, you know, again, it's beyond just like diversity and inclusion is obviously important. But despite all the talk and rhetoric around diversity and inclusion, which is not new,
right,
these problems still exist. Well, why is that? You know, like everyone's like, it's like, you know, social responsibility is not a new idea. Diversity and inclusion is not a new idea. There's a whole industry around diversity and inclusion, yet the people's lives are clearly not mattering enough within a lot of large organizations and small ones too.
right.
So I think that's fundamental.
Paul, let me just ask you, at the top of this call, we promised 7 principles that you were going to share with us.
Yes, I think I've talked about them without actually naming what they are.
But name them quickly for us so we can capture that.
I would say starting at home, which is focusing on your employees, number 1. Focusing on what's most urgent is number 2. Now. Committing to social change would be number 3, I would say. Meaningful partnerships with the nonprofit sector and with government is number 4. Recognizing the importance and impact of small and medium-sized enterprises, so number 5. Corporate activism, that we just talked about, is number 6. And number 7, which, you know, you talk to people and some things just, you kind of think, wow, that's incredible. Number 7 is what someone told me, I'll tell you the story, is think 7 generations ahead.
7 generations?
7. And this amazing woman named Tabitha Bull, who is the CEO of the Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business. And I asked her, you know, like, what is that one thing that you keep thinking about that you know, like if businesses could be doing something better, what would that be? And she said, think 7 generations ahead. And that is something which is an important principle within the Indigenous and Aboriginal community. And so what she said is, I can't remember the exact words, but she said, you know, for everything that, you know, that one does in terms of what you're doing and what you're taking from the land and so on, think about how that's going to influence 7 generations ahead. And, you know, tying that back to the situation today, the reality is if more people did that, you know, we would have more sustainable businesses, we would have more social impact, and probably we wouldn't have the situation we are in today with COVID, honestly.
It's a very powerful message. I mean, I think, you know, sometimes people think maybe a generation or 2 ahead, but 7 generations ahead is quite something.
It's incredible. Yeah. So
how do you get companies to, I don't know, change their mindset, adjust their mindset? I mean, what is it, a long process to get you know, to turn around the Titanic? I mean, how do you get a big bureaucracy, a big company to start thinking the way we would hope they do?
Well, it's not easy. It's like the, you know, the psychiatrist joke, right? You know, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? 1, but the light bulb has to want to change. So I think there's a lot. I mean, we've worked with, I can tell you, it does not, in fact, it rarely works, to be quite honest. You know, like I would say in the work that we do, occasionally you get someone who thinks along can actually would accept these principles that we've just talked about. And that's okay. You know, it doesn't matter. And most people are still focused on what's easy, what the check mark is, and that's the deliverable. You know, you give the money away or whatever, and it's done. Or you have the, you know, new diversity program or something. You know, it's I think we're talking about is something much more impactful than that. So I don't know. I've kind of given up trying to convince people. You know, like I don't really feel that's my job. Like other than just doing it, what we do. Like what we do, we just do what we do and then hope that some people think that's the right thing.
But do you get results?
Sometimes. You know,
That's
it's not
very
perfect.
honest.
Honestly, it's not like I can't say it's a slam dunk, honestly, you know,
Yeah, it's tough.
but it's hard, you know, it's not stuff that's easy. So,
But aren't there numbers? Aren't there good metrics on the value to the bottom? I mean, the impact on the bottom line. Companies that care, have social responsibility, that care about the things we want them to care about, actually do better business. Is that true, or is that just a some sort of myth,
no,
corporate
I
myth?
think
Because I've heard that.
there's all kinds of evidence. And in fact, coming back to our social impact initiative, if you look on the Global Social Impact Initiative.org, we've got some resources there that actually have some of the if people are interested in finding some of those metrics.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of evidence from all kinds of credible sources about that. And that it's, drives more consumer engagement, that it drives more employee engagement, does more, differentiation, reputation, investor confidence, and so on. I think the other thing one of the things for me that I was so encouraged by is it's okay for people like all of us to sit and talk about this, and think, well, you're doing something which is important, which we all believe, of course, but then you have increasingly people like Larry Fink from BlackRock, someone like that is saying, we are going to look at the companies we're investing in through the lens of social impact and social change. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
People actually, not many people listen to me, people listen to him. So I think that was great. I was thinking, wow, that's really good. So I still you get more and more of that, I think, and but I think that it's really a matter of convincing people by. I think the other thing now is, and we'll see what happens after this whole crisis. But I think crisis is good for change.
Yeah.
And people have been pushed into situations that are so uncomfortable because their ability to be opaque doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Right.
So
how many years have you been doing this, Paul? How many years have you been involved in social responsibility and social impact?
Well, I started Impact in 2001, so it's almost 20 years.
And so what's the greatest change you've seen in that time, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, just first of all, like a conversation like this 20 years, you just wouldn't have, no one had a clue about this. No one was even thinking about it. So, at the very beginning, like we were talking about, like you'd say I remember this vividly, true story. It was a pharmaceutical company we were working with. And we were saying, well, maybe it would be a good idea, instead of donating money to the soccer team, if you donated money to a health organization that's related to the work that you do. And I was like, whoa, okay. That was the big idea. That's how basic it was. So now we're talking about a real shift to understanding the importance of social change and what that means to the world and how a business can harness its resources to make that happen. So still that's not like an easy answer to that. But that's where people who really are doing great work that's where their heads are at. Like Unilever, Paul Pullman is a great example of that, so that's where we should all be.
In the last few minutes, I just want to ask you a little bit about the foundational work that you do, helping people with employment. Can you just tell us very, very briefly, because then I have two more quick questions for you.
Yeah, so we started the Impakt Foundation for Social Change, which actually, I'm happy to say, just last month is now a registered charity here in Canada. And it's impactfoundation.ca is the website.
We'll send all of that. Don't worry about the URLs.
So that came out, it honestly was sort of accidentally, in a way, or not accidentally, but kind of inadvertently. We had, in addition to the work we do at Impakt for large corporations, we had started to do our own direct social impact work. And the first thing was something called Higher Up, which was the first platform to connect youth who experience homelessness with entry-level employment at large companies like Walmart and Home Depot and whoever else was involved. And then we thought, well, this is different. We're not telling other people what to do. We're actually doing this ourselves.
Right.
And then we had something called the Taylor Project, which was ultimately starting to get people who were newcomers and refugees employment in the apparel industry. And then we recognized that, we didn't really have the structure. Impakt, even though it's a B Corp, wasn't really structured to get certain kinds of funding from charitable organizations, foundations, and others to be able to do this work really effectively. So we started the Impakt Foundation as a charity, and with the mission of creating pathways to employment for people in need. And so I'm very excited about that. And I think that, sadly, it's more timely than ever because there are more people in need of employment than there were.
Yes. Well, I want to commend you for walking the walk and, taking what you do as a business and taking it to heart and doing it yourself. I think that's a very powerful part of what you're doing. And I want to ask you the two questions with the 2 minutes we have left, the two questions I ask every masterclass person, and that is, what keeps you up at night and what makes you optimistic about the world? We'll do keeping you up first so that we literally end the call on an optimistic note. You have 2 minutes.
I'm not a very good sleeper. I have never been that way. In fact, we were just talking to my wife, Joanne, about this yesterday, and because I unfortunately don't have that in me. I don't know exactly why though. I'm just
okay. Well, somebody on this call who does all kinds of sleep work, get in touch with Paul and help him out.
I was listening to this I love this podcast and show, an NPR show called Radio Lab out of New York. And they have an episode about, I would just listen to, as I was not sleeping 2 nights ago, in the middle of the night, I was listening to this episode about insomnia. So you can listen to NPR show about insomnia.
Okay, Paul, well, people are jumping in. Carolyn says you don't have enough magnesium in your diet. Okay, so what keeps you up at night is you have insomnia. Now tell us in the last seconds, what are you optimistic about in the world? And are you petting your dog? Is that what's happening down there?
I am, actually.
Okay. There you go. Wonderful. Okay.
Lucas. What keeps me optimistic is I have just great faith in the resilience of people. I have great faith in our ability to make change. I have seen what's possible in cases that are, very, very unlikely and uncertain. And I don't know. I'm just built that way. I just will look at the opportunities always. Because what are you going to do? What's your choice? You can lean into that, or you can lean into something that's not going to get you anywhere. So that's what I choose to do.
Well, Paul, thank you so much. We are not able to any longer in Zoom unmute everyone, but I urge you all to unmute yourself and give Paul a very warm global round of applause for his time and energy and all the good work that he does. So
thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
Paul, thank you so much.
Thank you,
It was
Paul.
really, really interesting. You do incredible work.
Thank
Yes.
you, everybody.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Really important.